The Matrix wasn't just a film, it was a revolution, a cinematic detonation that bent reality, redefined action, and altered the trajectory of modern storytelling. But behind the sleek leather coats, the green-coated rain, and the iconic bullet time shots, there was something else. Something audiences weren't meant to see. For decades, fans have wondered, what really went on behind those sets in Sydney? What truths did Keanu Reeves keep to himself as the reluctant messiah of a generation? And why, after years of silence, has he finally decided to share his perspective? Because sometimes the most important revelations don't come when the cameras are rolling. They arrive years later, when the dust has settled and the star is ready to speak. Today at 60, Keanu Reeves pulls back the curtain. This is the story of The Matrix, the one you thought you knew and the one you've never been told. When The Matrix premiered in March 1999, cinema was at a crossroads. The late 90 seconds were dominated by high-concept blockbusters and the first wave of computer-generated spectacle, films like Armageddon, Godzilla, and The Phantom Menace. But nothing prepared audiences for what two little-known filmmakers from Chicago were about to unleash. Lana and Lily Wachowski, then credited as the Wachowski brothers, had convinced Warner Brothers to bankroll an audacious science fiction script about simulated reality. Shot primarily in Sydney, Australia, on a budget of roughly $63 million, the film wasn't expected to challenge cultural norms. It was, on paper, just another studio gamble. Then the trailer dropped. Audiences glimpsed black-clad rebels dodging bullets, reality glitching in impossible ways, and a cryptic promise. Unfortunately, no one can be told what The Matrix Island. You have to see it for yourself. By opening weekend, word of mouth exploded. The film grossed more than $460 million worldwide, sweeping 4 Academy Awards for its technical brilliance. But numbers only tell part of the story. The Matrix didn't just succeed, it reshaped cinema. Its visual language, from slow-motion bullet time sequences to wire-fu choreography borrowed from Hong Kong cinema, became instantly iconic. Hollywood scrambled to imitate it, spawning a wave of imitators that stretched from Charlie's Angels to Equilibrium. More importantly, it tapped into the anxieties of the new millennium. The Y2 Kelvin's scare was looming. Technology was accelerating faster than people could comprehend. Questions about artificial intelligence, surveillance, and human autonomy felt suddenly urgent. The Wachowskis had crystallized those fears into a mythic narrative about waking up from a false reality. And at the center of it all stood Keanu Reeves. For years, Reeves had been underestimated. Critics dismissed him as wooden, a surfer dude actor who stumbled into stardom with Bill and Ted's excellent adventure and speed. He had endured ridicule for Bram Stoker's Dracula, been overlooked for his Shakespearean attempts, and seemed destined for mediocrity. But Neo changed everything. Reeves's stoic presence, physical commitment, and quiet vulnerability turned him into the perfect, reluctant hero. He wasn't playing a role, he was embodying a question. What if you discovered your entire life was a lie? The success of The Matrix launched Reeves into a new orbit. No longer the punchline, he became the face of a cultural movement. Fans across the globe wore long coats, quoted Morpheus, and debated the film's layers of philosophy. Was it about control, free will, trans identity, all of the above? Yet, as dazzling as the film was, the shine obscured deeper truths. Studios controlled the narrative, reporters focused on the spectacle, and Reeves himself was notoriously reserved. His interviews were gentle, evasive, sometimes cryptic. He never revealed the full extent of his own journey through the chaos of production, the physical sacrifices, or the private revelations he carried. That silence lasted for decades, but now, as he reaches 60, Keanu Reeves finally begins to tell his side. The story of The Matrix isn't just about visual breakthroughs or box office glory. It's about the human cost, the hidden struggles, and the truths only the man at the center could reveal. On the surface, The Matrix looked effortless. The fights flowed like liquid. The camera froze bullets mid-air, and Keanu Reeves, draped in black leather and mirrored shades, appeared born for the role of Neo. Audiences saw sleek perfection, What they didn't see was how fragile that perfection really was. Months before production began, Keanu's body was already in rebellion. Two herniated discs had left him unable to move his legs without searing pain. At times, he could barely walk. Doctors told him that surgery was necessary, but recovery could sideline him for months. Time a blockbuster couldn't afford. Warner Brothers executives braced themselves for disaster. Yet Reeves insisted on training. Every morning in Sydney, he limped into Yuen Wu, Ping's dojo, strapped into a neck brace, and spent hours attempting kicks his body refused to deliver. Carrie-Anne Moss remembered the sight vividly. He could barely lift his leg at first, but he kept showing up. Day after day, never complained. The mask of invincibility had begun to crack, though only for those who stood close enough to see. And then came the secrecy. The Wachowskis were fiercely protective of their script. Few outside the main cast had read it in full. Reeves was given stacks of philosophy books, Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation, Buddhist texts, even fragments of Gnostic Gospels. The directors told him to absorb them, but not to expect answers. For an actor long mocked as shallow, this was overwhelming. Yet Reeves immersed himself. At night he filled notebooks with questions. If nothing is real, how do we know we exist? If choice is an illusion, is destiny any less so? His private journals became the soil out of which Neo's quiet intensity would grow. Meanwhile, the production was chaos. Warner Brothers, unconvinced of the Wachowskis' vision, forced them to storyboard nearly every frame. Budget fears loomed over the set. Crew members whispered that the studio might pull the plug mid-shoot. For Reeves, the contradiction was maddening. Publicly, he was cast as the savior of humanity. Privately, he worried the entire project could collapse before audiences ever saw a frame. Then came the cold. The rain-drenched sequences, especially the climactic subway fight and the rooftop rescues, required hours under man-made downpours. The water was icy, pumped at high pressure, soaking through costumes that clung to the actor's skin. After take upon take, Reeves's teeth chattered uncontrollably. He pressed his lips together between lines to hide the tremors. His body was screaming for warmth, but the world saw only Neo, calm and collected, bending the rules of physics. And still, he never broke character. Lawrence Fishburne later said, "He was a warrior. He had every reason to stop, but he never did." To the crew, Reeves was a quiet anchor. To audiences, he appeared untouchable. But the truth hidden beneath layers of silence was exhaustion, injury, and the weight of expectation. This was the mask. The Matrix presented a flawless mythology of invincible heroes. The studio marketed an unbreakable Keanu, and Reeves himself, ever humble, refused to puncture the illusion. He carried pain privately, wearing dignity like armor. But time has a way of peeling masks away. As the sequels approached, the pressures only multiplied. Warner Brothers wanted bigger action, more spectacle, higher stakes. The Wachowskis wanted to deepen the philosophy, and the actors, battered from the first film, faced years of relentless training. Reeves, loyal to his directors, never spoke out. He protected the story, even as it consumed him. Only now, at 60, has he begun to describe what it really felt like. The mixture of awe and dread, the sense of being part of something monumental yet nearly unbearable. "I was grateful," he admits, "but it was punishing. Every day felt like another test. You kept going because you had to." The mask cracked, but it never fully broke. And that's why his truth matters now. Because what audiences saw was a messiah. What Reeves lived was survival. And that survival sets the stage for the revelations to come. Keanu Reeves was already carrying more than audiences ever guessed. Long before he became Neo, his body was fighting against him. The two herniated discs in his neck were not small inconveniences. They were debilitating injuries that left him with numbness in his hands and constant tingling down his spine. Most actors in Hollywood would have stepped back, recovered, and fought to return later. But Reeves knew he didn't have that luxury. The Wachowskis had made it clear. Their vision depended on the actors performing their own fights. This wasn't going to be another action film stitched together by doubles and stuntmen. The philosophy of The Matrix demanded authenticity, that every strike and block came from the person embodying the role. For Reeves, that was both a gift and a curse. Every day he entered training with Yuan Wu, Ping's legendary stunt team, he was reminded of his limits. At first, he couldn't raise his leg above his hip. High kicks, essential to martial arts choreography, seemed impossible, but he refused excuses. He worked through the pain, stretching, kicking, collapsing, and then returning again. Hours passed in repetition until his body, slowly, painfully, began to comply. Carrie-Anne Moss later admitted she was stunned by his persistence. "He should not have been able to do what he did," she said. Lawrence Fishburne echoed the sentiment. "He didn't talk about it. He didn't complain. He just worked." By the time cameras rolled, Reeves had transformed himself. He still hurt. Every kick came with a flash of pain, but he hit it. On screen, he appeared fluid, confident, almost superhuman. In reality, every movement was earned through agony. The impact was enormous. The dojo fight with Morpheus, one of the most replayed scenes in modern cinema, wasn't just choreography. It was Reeves proving to himself and to the world that he could embody the one despite physical limits. His pain became part of the performance, shaping the stillness, the restraint, the concentration etched into his face, and he never spoke of it. For years, the injury was a footnote, whispered among crew, unknown to audiences. The myth of Neo remained intact, while Keanu quietly bore the scars. What this actually shows is that the myth of Neo wasn't just cinematic, it was lived in Reeves's own body. The performance fans celebrated was, in fact, the product of silent suffering. The Wachowskis didn't hand their cast a standard script. They handed them an intellectual labyrinth. Inside the rehearsal rooms of Sydney, Reeves and his co-stars were given reading lists that looked more like a graduate seminar than a movie prep packet. Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation. Zen koans, designed to fracture logic. The writings of cyberpunk pioneers like William Gibson, and even fragments of Gnostic texts that spoke of false realities and hidden knowledge. For many actors, this might have been overwhelming, but for Reeves, who was already a quiet, contemplative soul, it became a kind of obsession. He began journaling nightly, scribbling thoughts on illusion, identity, and control. One entry, later recalled in interviews, asked, "If choice is an illusion, is submission freedom?" These weren't just academic musings, they were the seeds of Neo's character. On set, Reeves earned a reputation as the philosopher. Co-stars remembered him arriving with highlighted passages, eager to discuss meaning before stepping into costume. Moss once joked that Keanu was living in the Matrix before the cameras started rolling. The Wachowskis encouraged this. They weren't just making an action spectacle, they wanted their actors to believe the world they were inhabiting, and Reeves did. He absorbed the philosophy until it became second nature. His quiet pauses, his haunted stares, his restrained delivery, all were shaped by his immersion in ideas larger than himself. The impact was profound. Critics who once dismissed Reeves as wooden now saw depth. His Neo wasn't flashy or theatrical. He was inward, searching, wrestling with questions that seemed to consume him. The philosophy he embraced off-set radiated through the performance on set, giving audiences a sense that Neo wasn't acting, he was awakening. What this shows is that The Matrix wasn't just a movie, it was a philosophy experiment, with Reeves as both student and vessel. The truth he carried wasn't just about dodging bullets, it was about confronting the illusion of reality itself. The Wachowskis had a vision, but Hollywood didn't always believe in it. In the mid-1990 seconds, Warner Brothers executives were skeptical that two relatively untested filmmakers could pull off a science fiction film this dense, this philosophical, and this expensive. To them, The Matrix was risky, a cerebral gamble in an era when audiences were flocking to disaster movies and comedies. So the Wachowskis came armed. They hired comic book artist Jeff Darrow and storyboard genius Steve Scrocci to illustrate nearly every frame of the film. The storyboards were so elaborate, they looked like a graphic novel. Executives reportedly sat in rooms, flipping page by page through the film as if it already existed. This was the only way the Wachowskis could secure the financing they needed. Keanu Reeves watched this tension unfold. He wasn't just an actor standing in front of the camera, he was a witness to the battles for artistic freedom happening behind it. He saw how every effect, every philosophical tangent, had to be justified to a corporation concerned only with return on investment. The Wachowskis won some victories. They preserved their radical vision, from the philosophy to the bullet time effects that would change cinema forever. But compromises were constant. Scenes were rewritten to streamline budget. Shooting schedules tightened. The weight of expectation grew heavier. Reeves's response was to align himself not with the studio, but with the crew. When Warner Brothers later offered him a lucrative profit-sharing deal, Reeves reportedly redirected tens of millions of his own potential earnings to ensure that special effects and costume departments were compensated properly. To him, the true miracle of The Matrix wasn't studio executives. It was the craftspeople who built worlds out of rain, light, and green code. This choice cemented his reputation. In an industry often marked by ego, Reeves was the star who gave money away. Crew members whispered about his humility. Journalists later celebrated him as the nicest guy in Hollywood. But those choices weren't random. They were forged in the crucible of studio conflict. What this shows is that Reeves wasn't just a passenger in the machine. He was a quiet guardian of fairness, standing against the corporate erosion of art. Success brings pressure. After The Matrix became a global phenomenon, Warner Brothers demanded more. The Wachowskis agreed to expand the story into two sequels, Reloaded and Revolutions, to be shot back-to-back in Sydney and Oakland between 2001 and 2003. The scale was unprecedented. Reloaded featured the infamous highway chase, a sequence that required building an entire freeway from scratch in an abandoned naval base. Revolutions staged the climactic battle between Neo and Agent Smith in a rain-soaked set that swallowed months of production time. For Reeves, the toll was brutal. Training intensified. Wire work became more punishing. The philosophy became more abstract, and audiences, primed for perfection, expected lightning to strike twice. It felt like running a marathon at a sprint pace, Reeves later admitted. Every day blurred into another test of endurance. The reviews were mixed. Some critics praised the ambition, others accused the sequels of collapsing under their own weight. Fans debated endlessly whether the story's complexity enriched or ruined the franchise. Through it all, Reeves never wavered. He defended the Wachowskis publicly, refusing to disparage their vision. But privately, the weight gnawed at him. He wondered if he had become trapped inside the very kind of system the films warned against, a machine demanding endless output, indifferent to human cost. He was still Neo, but at times he felt more like Thomas Anderson again, an exhausted employee trying to meet impossible quotas. The impact lingered long after cameras stopped rolling. Reeves carried the fatigue, the injuries, and the questions with him into the next chapter of his career. What this shows is that cinematic success can mutate into a trap where even victory feels like another cage. For more than 2 decades, Keanu Reeves kept his silence. He let the films speak for themselves, let the mythology of Neo eclipse the frailty of the man who played him. Fans speculated, journalists prodded, but Reeves, famously private, offered little more than gentle smiles and vague gratitude. Now, at 60, he finally begins to speak plainly, and what he reveals is both simpler and more profound than anyone expected. He admits that The Matrix changed him, but not only in the ways fans imagine. It wasn't just about career transformation or the elevation from wooden surfer to philosophical action star. It was about the physical and emotional price he paid. He describes training while his body screamed, performing stunts while his spine was still healing, and pushing through exhaustion so deep he sometimes forgot what day it was. "I was grateful," he said in a rare candid moment, "but it was punishing." For Reeves, the films weren't simply a job. They were an ordeal. Each kick, each line of dialogue became a small test of endurance. Each day on set blurred the boundary between role and reality. Neo was discovering that his world was an illusion. Keanu was discovering how much a human body can endure before it breaks. What makes this revelation striking is not that Reeves suffered, that is common in action filmmaking, but that he chose silence for so long. He refused to undermine the myth when it mattered most. Only now, with distance and perspective, does he feel free to reveal what it took to keep the mask intact. The truth, he insists, is that The Matrix was not effortless brilliance. It was labor. It was sacrifice. It was commitment beyond reason. He admits that he doubted himself, doubted whether he could embody the philosophy, doubted whether the sequels could hold together. And yet he stayed. He endured. The impact of his honesty is powerful. It reframes the franchise not as a story of cinematic invincibility, but as a story of fragile endurance. Neo may have been the one, but Reeves was simply human, hurting, struggling, and choosing to keep going. And perhaps that is the greater revelation. By acknowledging the pain, Reeves allows audiences to see him not as a flawless messiah, but as a man who survived a crucible. His humanity deepens the mythology, making the films resonate not just as science fiction, but as testament. What this shows is that the most powerful revelation isn't about hidden code or prophecy, it's about honesty. And at 60, Keanu Reeves has finally given it. So after all the speculation, what is the truth Keanu Reeves finally allows himself to share? It isn't a shocking plot twist buried in the green code. It isn't a conspiracy about the Wachowskis or a secret studio betrayal. It's something quieter, and in its own way, far more profound. The truth is that the Matrix demanded everything of him, his body, his mind, his spirit, and that he gave it all, even when it nearly broke him. Reeves admits that he didn't glide through those fight scenes with the ease audiences believed. He fought through searing pain from a damaged spine. He endured bone-deep exhaustion from months of training. He pressed through rain-soaked nights that left him shivering and half-numb, and he carried all of it silently, never once letting the public see how fragile the illusion really was. That silence wasn't cowardice. It was devotion. Devotion to the film. Devotion to the Wachowskis' vision. Devotion to the crew who worked alongside him, whose sacrifices often went unseen. Reeves's truth is that The Matrix wasn't simply an escape into spectacle. It was a crucible of endurance, where every person on set had to decide how much they were willing to give. And Reeves gave everything. When you look back at those iconic moments, the dojo fight, the bullet dodge, the final rain-soaked battle, it's easy to see only choreography. But now, knowing what Reeves reveals, you see something else. You see a man pushing against the limits of his own body, quietly willing himself to embody a myth. The line between actor and character blurred. Neo fought against the illusion of the Matrix. Keanu fought against the illusion of invincibility. Both confronted systems that sought to control them. Both emerged scarred, but victorious. For Reeves, the revelation isn't about exposing secrets. It's about acknowledging cost. That art, true, world-changing art, does not come without pain. He stayed silent for years because he didn't want to dim the magic. But at 60, distance allows honesty, and honesty finally allows us to see The Matrix not just as a landmark film, but as a human story of endurance. The real revelation isn't about machines, code, or prophecy. It's about sacrifice. And it's about a man who carried the weight of a world on his back, quietly, humbly, until the world was ready to understand. When the dust settled after the trilogy, one thing was undeniable. The Matrix had forever altered the DNA of cinema. The original film is now preserved in the Library of Congress for its cultural and aesthetic significance. Filmmakers from Christopher Nolan to the Russo brothers cite it as an influence. Even 20 years later, the green code still flickers in trailers, music videos, and fashion campaigns. But the aftermath for those who made it was far more complicated. For the Wachowskis, the trilogy was both triumph and burden. They had proved Hollywood wrong, cemented themselves as visionary filmmakers, and carved out a permanent place in pop culture history. Yet they also became lightning rods for criticism. The sequels, ambitious and dense, divided audiences. Some accused them of losing control of the narrative. Others defended the films as misunderstood epics. The Wachowskis themselves, famously private, retreated from the spotlight, emerging only for select projects. Their legacy, however, remains tied to the world they built in 1999, a world that continues to spark philosophical debate. Carrie-Anne Moss found her career forever marked by Trinity. The role was groundbreaking. A female action hero who was neither sidekick nor damsel, but equal partner. Moss embraced it, though she admitted later that finding roles of equal depth was difficult. Still, Trinity gave her an immortal place in science fiction lore. Lawrence Fishburne's Morpheus became archetype, mentor, prophet, leader. Though he did not return for The Matrix Resurrections in 2021, his influence lingered. His booming voice and enigmatic presence remained synonymous with wisdom in pop culture shorthand. And then there was Keanu Reeves. For him, the fallout was deeply personal. The Matrix had catapulted him into a new echelon of stardom. Yet he carried not only fame, but fatigue. Interviews through the early 2000 seconds, he often looked weary, reluctant to bask in the limelight. He took smaller projects, like A Scanner Darkly and Thumbsucker, before slowly stepping back from blockbuster spectacle. Fans wondered if he was retreating, but Reeves was simply regrouping. When John Wick premiered in 2014, audiences suddenly realized he was back, not as Neo, but as something just as enduring. The Wick films echoed The Matrix in style. Sleek choreography, existential undertones, a reluctant hero drawn back into violence. It was no accident that stunt coordinators from The Matrix, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, were the architects of Wick's rebirth. Reeves's loyalty to his crew had come full circle. Those who once trained beside him in punishing Sydney dojos now stood beside him as directors of his comeback. And what of The Matrix itself? In 2021, Lana Wachowski returned with The Matrix Resurrections. Reeves, now in his 50s, reprised Neo. The film was polarizing, celebrated by some as bold meta-commentary, and dismissed by others as unnecessary. For Reeves, though, it was a chance to revisit the role with wisdom. He embraced the nostalgia, the philosophy, and the reunion with Moss, while acknowledging that the film was not for everyone. It was about love, he said simply. At 60, Keanu Reeves now speaks with gratitude. He acknowledges the punishing toll, but he frames it as part of a larger gift. It changed my life, he reflects. He doesn't shy away from the pain anymore, but he doesn't regret it either. To him, The Matrix is both scar and blessing, something he'll always carry. So what do we actually learn from Keanu Reeves' long-delayed honesty about The Matrix? We learn that cinematic revolutions don't arrive gift-wrapped. They're carved out of risk, sweat, and private suffering. The flawless world audiences saw in 1999, the reign of green code, the ballet of bullets, the savior in black leather, wasn't effortless. It was built on the back of a man who refused to surrender, even when his body and mind were telling him to stop. Reeves's revelation reframes the myth. The Matrix isn't only about simulated worlds or philosophical puzzles. It's also about the endurance of a single actor who embodied its themes in real time. He was trapped in pain, pushing against forces larger than himself, doubting the path forward, yet still choosing to believe. That's not just Neo's story. That's Keanu's story. And perhaps that's why the films still resonate. Audiences sensed something authentic beneath the spectacle. They weren't just watching CGI tricks or stunt choreography. They were watching a man embody the cost of awakening, the courage to keep fighting, and the humility to stay silent until the moment was right. Now, at 60, Reeves has finally revealed the truth, that behind every myth stands a human being, scarred but unbroken. And that's the lesson worth carrying. So now you've heard it. The truth about the Matrix wasn't hidden in the code. It was hidden in Keanu Reeves himself. His pain, his sacrifice, his honesty, those were the real secrets, revealed only with time. But here's the question for you. Does knowing what Reeves endured make those films more powerful? Or does it change how you see them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if this deep dive gave you a new perspective, share it with someone who still debates the sequels. Subscribe for more hidden truths of Hollywood, and stay tuned, because the stories behind the icons are never as simple as they seem.